please don't leave us here." Diane Maxwell's voice trembled as she clutched her 3 newborns against her chest, her tears blending with the bitter Appalachian wind. She stood barefoot in a thin hospital gown, trembling on the gravel road, watching as her husband Richard slammed the driver's side door without meeting her eyes. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered, his voice flat and hollow, like he'd rehearsed the line but never quite believed it himself. The engine roared to life, tires crunching over gravel as he pulled away without a second glance. In seconds, a second in, the red tail light has disappeared into the darkness, leaving Diane alone, vulnerable, bleeding, and utterly unprepared, in the middle of the cold wilderness. She stared into the vanishing distance, unable to process the betrayal. Her mind, still fogged from the cesarean delivery just 2 days ago, tried desperately to make sense of what had just happened. But her body, weakened and stitched, didn't have time for shock, because nestled against her skin were 3 tiny lives, a boy and 2 girls, breathing softly, their warmth the only thing tethering her to sanity. Wind howled through the trees, scattering dried leaves across the ground like whispers of warning. Diane's hospital gown flapped in the icy gusts, offering no defense against the dropping temperature. The babies whimpered, their tiny faces scrunched in confusion as the first hints of hypothermia crept in. She needed shelter, fast. Every instinct screamed for her to move, to run, to survive, but her legs wobbled beneath her like wet branches. Every step sent a white-hot bolt of pain through her abdomen, where the C-section stitches pulled tight with every motion. She winced but gritted her teeth, because there was no one coming to save her. She had to save herself. Diane had been a nursing student once. In another life, before Richard, she had nearly completed her emergency medicine degree before he convinced her to slow down and focus on family. Now that forgotten training became her only hope. She whispered to herself, trying to slow her racing heart, "Think, Diane, think." The first priority was warmth. Hypothermia could kill a newborn in under an hour in these conditions. She carefully tucked the babies inside her gown, pressing them against her skin to share whatever body heat she could muster. Her stitches protested violently, but she bore the pain in silence. Her children's breathing began to slow, soothed by her heartbeat and warmth. It gave her just enough strength to keep going. As night thickened, the woods pressed in around her, but then, just ahead, something caught her eye, a structure barely visible between the trees. It was an old hunting cabin, dark and seemingly abandoned. Her heart surged with cautious hope. She stumbled forward, barely able to lift her feet, her vision swimming with exhaustion. Each breath came ragged and shallow, but the baby's soft sighs reminded her why she had to push through. She reached the cabin's wooden steps and collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing not from pain, but from sheer relief. Just as she reached for the rusty doorknob, a sudden sound behind her made her freeze. Footsteps, crunching leaves. She wasn't alone. Her entire body went rigid as maternal instinct kicked in like a switchblade. She tightened her arms around her children, ready to throw herself over them if it came to that. But then, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Hello?" came a woman's voice. "Is someone there?" Diane's knees gave out in sheer relief as an older woman emerged from the shadows, silver hair tied back, wearing a heavy coat and hiking boots. "Oh my God!" the woman gasped, rushing forward. "I'm Fabiana Scott. I live down the hill. I saw headlights up here. What happened to you?" The next hours blurred as Fabiana moved with practiced urgency, guiding Diane and the babies into her nearby cottage. A cozy, off-grid home complete with a generator and a stocked pantry. Within moments, Diane found herself lying on a warm couch, her babies wrapped in soft towels tucked into dresser drawers acting as makeshift cribs. The room smelled of lavender and old wood. Fabiana, as it turned out, was a retired obstetric nurse, someone who had spent decades delivering babies, now unexpectedly delivering salvation. "It wasn't chance that brought me to you tonight," she said gently while checking the baby's vitals. "Someone up there must be watching over you." As Diane lay under heavy blankets, warmed and safe for the first time in hours, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Her voice was hoarse and hollow as she recounted the moments leading up to Richard's betrayal, how he had become increasingly controlling, how he had insisted on taking her out of the hospital early, how he told her not to ask questions. He said he'd handled the paperwork, she whispered. I never signed anything. The nurses were in shift change, and he just wheeled me out. Fabiana froze, her face tightening. Diane, she said carefully, I think your husband kidnapped you and the babies. That's not just abandonment. That's a felony. Suddenly, what had felt like a tragic personal betrayal twisted into something darker. Criminal, calculated, and intentional. Diane's blood ran cold as a terrifying thought clawed into her mind. What if he didn't just leave them to die out of fear, but on purpose? Outside, the wind howled louder, as if echoing her dread. And miles away, in a dark office lined with secrets, Richard Maxwell, or the man she thought was Richard, opened a safe labeled the Project Legacy. His hands trembled not with guilt, but with fear. Because whatever he had started by abandoning Diane in those woods wasn't over. It had only just begun. Diane woke the next morning to the soft crackle of an old radio and the distant smell of brewed coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until the ache in her abdomen and the faint cries of her babies reminded her. She wasn't dreaming. Her husband had left her to die in the wilderness, and a stranger, a retired nurse named Fabiana, had saved her life. The cabin was warm, modestly furnished, with worn but clean quilts and a wood-burning stove crackling in the corner. Diane sat up slowly on the couch, every muscle in her body stiff from the trauma of the night before. Fabiana stood at the kitchen counter, humming quietly as she prepared formula. The triplets were nestled in drawer bassinets lined with soft blankets, sleeping peacefully. Safe for now. Good morning, sweetheart, Fabiana said gently, sensing Diane was awake. You and your little ones made it through the night. Her voice carried a comforting strength that wrapped around Diane like another blanket. They're fighters, just like their mama. Diane blinked back tears. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't have to, Fabiana said, bringing over a cup of tea, but you do have to tell me everything you can about what happened. As the steam from the mug curled in the morning light, Diane told her everything, or at least everything she could remember. She spoke in halting, exhausted sentences about how she had met Richard 3 years earlier during her final year of nursing school, how charming he had been, how quickly their romance turned into marriage. He convinced me to quit school, move away from my friends, start over, she explained. At first, he was excited about the pregnancy, but when we found out it was triplets, her voice trailed off. Fabiana's expression darkened. I know this is a lot, Diane whispered, looking down at her hands, but something changed in him. It was like he was scared of them. Or maybe not scared, maybe angry. Just then, the radio crackled to life. A local news bulletin reported the unauthorized disappearance of Diane Maxwell and her newborn triplets from Memorial Hospital. Diane's breath caught in her throat. They're looking for you, Fabiana said, which means Richard didn't cover his tracks as well as he thought. But it also means he's going to realize you survived and come looking. Diane nodded slowly, fear blooming in her chest. She thought back to the hospital, how no one had questioned Richard wheeling her out. He said he signed the discharge forms, but now she realized she never signed anything. Oh my God, she gasped. He kidnapped us. And now we know, Fabiana said gravely, that this wasn't just a case of a man overwhelmed by fatherhood. This was planned. A knock at the door broke the tension like shattered glass. Diane froze. But Fabiana moved calmly to the window, peered outside, then relaxed. It's my nephew, Louis. He's the sheriff's deputy I told you about. The door opened to reveal a tall man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a serious face. Aunt Fab, he said quietly, glancing at Diane, we need to talk. Urgently. Within minutes, Fabiana and Louis were huddled with Diane at the kitchen table. Louis pulled out a small notepad and a laptop. I ran a background check on your husband, he said, or rather, the man you think is your husband. His name isn't Richard Maxwell, it's Deus Thorne, and he's been using a stolen identity for years. Diane felt the blood drain from her face. He's connected to at least 3 suspicious deaths across multiple states, Louis continued. All involved sudden tragedies, all had large insurance payouts, and every single one involved a woman giving birth, usually to twins or triplets. Diane's mouth went dry. The life insurance policies, she whispered. He made me sign them before the babies were born, said it was just in case. Louis nodded grimly. He's part of an insurance fraud ring. They target wealthy or vulnerable families, manipulate pregnancies, often using fertility clinics, and stage accidents that lead to high payouts. In your case, they tried something bolder. Leave you for dead and make it look like a tragic wilderness incident. The weight of the truth hit Diane like a tidal wave. Her whole marriage had been a setup. Every affectionate moment, every smile, every whispered promise. She had been nothing more than a target. Tears welled in her eyes. He never planned for us to survive. Louis's expression softened. No, he didn't. But now that you did, he's going to be desperate, which means we need to move fast. Diane clutched the edge of the table. Are the babies safe here? For now, Fabiana said. But if he has associates, and he does, they'll come, and they'll come hard. Louis leaned forward. There's something else. 15 years ago, a woman named Rebecca Turner gave birth to twins in Cincinnati. She was married to Deus Thorne, too, under a different name. The twins died 2 weeks later. Sudden infant death syndrome was the official cause, but he hesitated. A lot of nurses suspected foul play. And the mother? Diane asked. She vanished, Louis said, officially presumed dead. Diane shook her head in disbelief. He's done this before, and he's been getting away with it for years. Not anymore, Louis promised. He handed Diane a sealed envelope. Inside is everything you need to vanish with your babies. New identities, a safety protocol, and backup contacts. We'll keep you safe until we can build the case to bring this whole ring down. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the trees. And somewhere, not far enough away, Richard Maxwell sat behind a locked office door, opening a hidden safe. Inside was a thick file marked Project Legacy, but as he stared at its contents, his hands shook. Not out of guilt, but fear. Diane had survived. The triplets were alive. And now the plan was falling apart. What none of them knew yet, not Richard, not even Diane, was that this wasn't just about insurance. There was something far more valuable inside those babies' blood than money could ever buy. At 60 miles away from Fabiana's quiet cottage, the world looked very different. The air smelled of leather and paper inside a sleek, modern office tucked away on the top floor of a financial firm. The blinds were drawn, the door locked, and the only sound was the rhythmic click of a combination safe being opened. Richard Maxwell, or rather Deus Thorne, crouched in front of the wall-mounted safe, his breath shallow. The fake identity had served him well for nearly 6 years, but now everything was unraveling. He had watched the news bulletin like everyone else. Local woman and newborn triplets missing after sudden departure from hospital. His image had not been released, not yet, but it would be soon, and when it did, everything he had spent a decade building would come crashing down. He pulled a thick manila folder from the safe, its tab labeled in red, Project Legacy. Inside, clipped together with paper fasteners and sticky notes, was the story behind the story. Medical charts, genetic analysis reports, fertility clinic invoices, and insurance documentation. It wasn't just a paper trail. It was evidence of something that, if exposed, would take down not only Deus, but a web of elite partners spanning multiple states, fertility networks, and insurance conglomerates. Deus swallowed hard and opened the top report, a genetic screening summary from Genesis Advanced Fertility Institute in Chicago. The name on the file was Diane Maxwell. The test results were highlighted in yellow, circled with a scribbled note. Confirmed, Class R markers present. Proceed with acceleration protocol. Multiple embryo implant approved. He remembered the day he got the call. We found one, the voice had said. Unaware, no family ties, emotionally isolated, ideal candidate. Diane had been chosen not for love or fate or compatibility, but for her genetic profile. The relationship that followed was scripted, manipulative, precise. The kind of seduction Deus had practiced for years. It was how he lured his first wife, Rebecca Turner, before staging her disappearance. She had been pregnant with twins, just like Diane. Back then, the project was in its infancy. It had started with simple insurance fraud, select a woman with limited support, push for fertility treatment, collect the massive life insurance payouts when tragedy struck. Multiple births meant larger policies, more tragic loss, more money. But it didn't stop there. Over time, the insurance schemes merged with something darker. The fertility clinics, many of which operated under shell companies, began running unauthorized genetic screenings. They weren't just helping families get pregnant, they were hunting for rare mutations, biological miracles that could be monetized. And if a mother happened to die in the process, all the better. The children could be funneled into research programs, rebranded as orphans, adopted by cooperating families or private foundations. They called it Project Legacy, a sanitized name for a network of coordinated human exploitation. Diane's triplets weren't just miracles by chance. They were engineered, carefully selected, implanted with a combination of embryos to maximize the potential for class R mutations, a rare gene cluster associated with immunity to autoimmune disorders and resistance to certain viral infections. Deus didn't fully understand the science. That wasn't his role. He was the handler, the closer, the one who made sure the pieces moved into place, the one who made sure there were no loose ends. But now Diane had become a loose end, a dangerous one. She'd survived. Worse, she had help. Fabiana, the nurse, and that nosy nephew of hers. Deus had underestimated them all. He thought he had planned everything, the remote location, the timing, the weather, but she had made it out, and if she started talking, the whole operation could collapse. He stood up quickly, pacing the office. He dialed a secure number. The phone rang twice, then connected. "She's alive," he said without preamble. On the other end, a woman's voice sighed, "We know. The news report came through 30 minutes ago. Your window is closing." "I need extraction," he said, his voice tight. Silence, then, "Too risky. The priority is recovery. The children. If you can't secure them, someone else will." "You don't understand," he snapped. "If she talks, she won't get the chance," the voice replied coldly. "Make sure of it. Use whatever means necessary. But remember, we only need the children. Do what you have to." The line went dead. Deuce stared at the phone. For the first time in years, he was the one being hunted. Not just by law enforcement, but by the very people he worked for. People who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him if it served the bigger operation. His eyes fell back to the file. The triplets' medical data alone were worth millions. Pharmaceutical companies would kill for access to children whose blood carried a blueprint for immune resilience. Some already had, others were waiting for results. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. He had abandoned those babies to die, but now their survival was his only hope of salvation, or at least leverage. Back in the cottage, Diane stared out the kitchen window, watching snow begin to fall. Her mind replayed Louis's words over and over. "Your husband isn't who you think he is." But she wasn't his victim anymore. She was a mother, a fighter. And she was starting to realize that the man she married wasn't just running from responsibility, he was running from exposure. From the truth, from her, because she had survived. And now she had a story to tell. One that could unravel an empire built on death, deception, and DNA. She turned back toward the triplets, all now awake and cooing softly. Their eyes searched her face, trusting her without question. And in that moment, Diane knew exactly what she had to do. They weren't just her children, they were the key to stopping all of this. And if Richard, or Deus, or whatever name he hid behind, came back for them, he'd learn that the woman he tried to bury was the same one who would bury him. The wind howled through the Appalachian hills like a warning as dawn crept over Fabiana Scott's secluded cottage. Inside, the soft coos of 3 tiny infants floated through the air, wrapped in the safety of handmade blankets and the warmth of the woman who had rescued them. Diane stood at the window, holding her son, Christopher, while Fabiana gently prepared formula in the kitchen. The quiet was misleading, fragile like glass. Diane could feel it. Something was coming. The calm before a storm. It shattered moments later. A crackle on Deputy Louis Scott's police radio split the silence. Multiple vehicles spotted approaching from the South Ridge. Fast. His face turned pale. "They've found us." Panic bloomed behind Diane's ribs. Her C-section scar ached and fear clamped around her like a vice. Her babies, Jean, Faith, and Christopher, were only days old. They had already survived the unthinkable. But now the people who wanted them gone were coming back to finish what Richard started. Louis turned to Fabiana, urgency in his voice. "Aunt Fab, we've got less than 20 minutes. Maybe less. He reached for his service weapon and placed a sealed envelope into Diane's trembling hands. Everything you need to disappear is in there. New IDs, bank access, backup contacts. Memorize it, then burn it. Diane stared at him. Disappear? Forever? If it means keeping your children alive? Yes. Fabiana didn't hesitate. The old tunnel, she said, already moving toward the pantry. Back in Prohibition days, the owners used it to run moonshine. It comes out near the creek, about a quarter-mile into the woods. She opened a hidden door behind a shelf of canned goods, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Louis handed Diane her baby girls and scooped up Christopher. I'll go first. Diane, follow me. Aunt Fab will close the door behind us and give us time. No, Diane's voice cracked. You can't stay behind. She has to, Louis interrupted. If they don't find anyone right away, they'll tear this place apart. We need a distraction. Fabiana gave Diane a look full of strength. 3 minutes, she said, that's all I need. And then she was gone, closing the hidden door behind them. Down in the tunnel, Diane clutched her children tight as she moved through the cold, musty passageway. The wooden beams creaked overhead. Cobwebs clung to the walls. Her stitches screamed with every step, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. The babies were astonishingly quiet, as if they somehow sensed the danger. Above them, muffled voices filtered through the floorboards, the sound of heavy boots. A door slamming open. Richard's voice, cold and commanding, barked orders. Search everything! They're here somewhere! Diane's blood turned to ice. They moved quickly through the tunnel, emerging into the gray light near the creek, surrounded by thick undergrowth. Louis guided them to a second vehicle he had hidden earlier, an unmarked police SUV with tinted windows and pre-installed baby seats. Get in, he ordered. We don't have much time. Diane's fingers fumbled with the seat buckles, her heart pounding. Fabiana, will she be okay? She's tough, Louis replied, jaw clenched. But we've got to go. As they pulled onto the back road, Diane's instincts flared. Wait, she gasped. The hospital bracelets. The babies still have them. They can be tracked. Louis swore under his breath, pulling over. With his pocket knife, he carefully removed each ID band, then buried them under a large rock. Good thinking, Bob, he said. It's the small details that keep people alive. But the moment they got back on the road, headlights exploded behind them. A black SUV roared out of the trees, accelerating fast. Hold on, Louis shouted, slamming the gas as the SUV gave chase. The babies began to cry, overwhelmed by the noise and motion. Diane twisted in her seat, trying to soothe them even as her own terror clawed at her chest. She looked in the mirror. The man driving the SUV wasn't Richard. It was his associate, Philippe. A second vehicle appeared ahead, blocking the road. They're trying to box us in, Louis said, grabbing his radio. This is Deputy Scott, Forest Service Road 23, pursuing suspects in the Maxwell case. Civilian mother and 3 newborns on board. Requesting immediate backup. Static. No signal this deep in the mountains. Louis swerved hard, taking a sharp turn onto an old dirt track. Diane barely registered the jolt, too focused on protecting her babies. I have an idea, she said suddenly, breathless. The ranger cabin, the one I saw when I was abandoned. It's close, and it connects to the abandoned mines. Louis looked at her. Those tunnels are unstable. It's dangerous. So is this, she replied. Richard doesn't know I remember it. He mentioned it on the phone that night. He called it his backup drop zone. They'll have supplies there. Maybe evidence. He didn't hesitate. Okay, we go. The SUV jolted down the rugged trail, tires skidding on loose rock. The ranger cabin emerged from the trees. Dark, silent, forgotten by time. They parked behind it and killed the lights. We've got maybe 2 minutes, Louis said. What's the plan? Diane nodded toward a tangle of weeds and old mining equipment. The tunnel entrance. We use it to double back. Make them think we went deeper than we really did. They had just reached the tunnel when headlights swept into the clearing. 2 SUVs, 1 silver sedan. Richard was here. Louis pushed Diane and the babies into the shadows behind a rusted winch. And then he was gone, circling around toward the cabin. Moments later, Diane heard his voice from inside. In here! I need help with the babies. Richard and his men ran toward the sound. Diane didn't wait. She clutched her children, ducked into the tunnel, and moved fast. The passage narrowed quickly. Debris crunched beneath her feet. Her wound throbbed, but she didn't stop. Gunshots erupted behind her. She stifled a scream. "Louis," she whispered, "please be okay." Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She nearly screamed until she heard the whisper, "It's me, Louis." He led them out through a second exit, back into daylight. And there, on the ridge above the ranger cabin, came a sight Diane would never forget. Dozens of armed agents in FBI jackets storming through the trees. Richard had walked into a trap, and Diane had escaped. Not just with her children, but with the truth. The hunt was over. Or so she thought, because what lay ahead would make this escape look like the easy part. Red and blue lights flickered through the dense Appalachian forest as the FBI descended on the clearing outside the ranger's cabin. Diane stumbled out of the mine shaft into the early morning light, clutching her babies to her chest. Louis was at her side, guiding her through the chaos with steady hands and adrenaline-fueled precision. She could hardly breathe, but she kept moving, instinct alone carrying her forward. Behind them, agents in tactical gear moved with silent efficiency, surrounding the cabin and the two SUVs that had just arrived. Diane's heart thundered as she heard a voice boom through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. The area is surrounded. Drop your weapons and exit the building with your hands in the air." Everything slowed as Diane turned around, only to see him. Deus Thorne, emerged from the shadows of the cabin, flanked by Philippe and two other armed men. His face was pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. He was still wearing the mask of composure, but it was cracking. For the first time since she had met him, Diane saw fear in his eyes. Their gazes locked. Her babies whimpered softly, sensing the tension. Richard didn't even glance at them. Instead, he looked past her, his eyes widening with shock. Diane turned and froze. A woman stepped out of the trees, flanked by two agents. She wore body armor with FBI emblazoned across the front. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her eyes were hard with determination. Diane recognized her face instantly, not from life, but from an old photograph Fabiana had shown her just days earlier. A woman presumed dead, a woman Richard had once been married to, Rebecca Turner, alive, and she was walking straight toward him. Time seemed to stop. Richard's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Rebecca didn't blink. "You thought you were clever, Deus, but you're not the only one who can fake their death." Diane could barely comprehend what she was hearing. Rebecca's voice rang out across the clearing. "Special Agent Rebecca Turner, FBI Medical Fraud Division. Deus Thorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder." She took a step closer. "Oh, and let's not forget, impersonating a husband and father." Richard stumbled backward, raising his weapon. Several agents aimed theirs in return. "You don't understand," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't know who's behind this. If I don't deliver—" "We already know," Rebecca cut in coldly. "While you were out here hunting Diane and the babies, we were executing simultaneous raids across 5 states. The clinic staff, the dirty cops, the insurance executives, all in custody. This operation is over." Philippe and the others dropped their weapons, surrendering as agents rushed in to detain them. But Richard refused. He looked around wildly, sweat dripping from his brow, his hand twitching near his ankle. "Gun!" Diane shouted instinctively. "Right ankle! Backup weapon!" In a flash, Richard bent to grab it, but Rebecca moved faster. In one swift motion, she tackled him, disarming him with brutal precision and slamming him face down into the dirt. Cuffs clicked. It was over. Diane stood frozen, the babies pressed tightly to her chest. Louis wrapped an arm around her shoulder, steadying her. "You're safe now," he said softly. But Diane wasn't so sure. Later that morning, after Richard and his team were secured and driven away in separate black SUVs, Diane sat in a mobile command unit parked nearby. Rebecca sat across from her, looking every bit the federal agent. But beneath the armor was something else. A survivor. "I'm sorry we couldn't step in sooner," Rebecca said gently. "We were tracking him for years, but without a witness. We didn't have a way in." Diane looked at her babies, now swaddled and asleep in a portable bassinet. He told me you left him, that you had postpartum depression, that you abandoned your twins. Rebecca's jaw tightened. He said the same thing to everyone after I vanished. The truth is, I faked my death and went underground with the help of the Bureau. The twins were placed with my parents through witness protection. It was the only way to keep them safe. Diane's head swam. So all this time, we've been watching him, tracking every move. But we didn't expect this, Rebecca continued. Triplets. Class R markers. The data flagged your case as soon as it was uploaded to the clinic's internal servers. That's how we knew. Diane blinked. Class R? Rebecca nodded toward a nearby agent who brought in a folder. Your children have a rare genetic profile, immunity to several autoimmune diseases. It's not a miracle, it's science, but very profitable science. Project Legacy wasn't just about insurance money. They were selling genetic data to pharmaceutical companies. Your babies were worth millions. Diane's voice caught. So he never loved me. Rebecca didn't answer right away. He doesn't love anyone. He sees people as tools, variables, investments. But you survived, and you protected your children. That's what he never planned for. Diane's eyes welled with tears. She looked down at her children, their small chests rising and falling peacefully. What happens now? She asked quietly. We have a few options, Rebecca said. We can place you in witness protection, or there's another program, one that offers security, support, and a chance to use your story to protect others. It's your choice. Outside, the forest looked different, not threatening but vast, full of possibility. As Diane walked out into the morning light, she saw Fabiana arrive in a police cruiser, escorted by a state officer. The elderly nurse stepped out, alive and smiling, and Diane ran into her arms, sobbing in relief. Rebecca stood beside Louis, watching Diane hold her babies in the center of the chaos. The woman who had taken on a system built to destroy her and won. She's stronger than I ever was, Rebecca said quietly. Louis looked at her. She had no idea what she was walking into. Rebecca smiled, and she still walked through it anyway. Diane turned to look back at the two of them, holding her babies close. She's not done yet, Louis added. And he was right, because the storm may have passed. But the real story, the one that would shake the foundations of medical ethics, corporate greed, and human resilience, was just beginning. The consultation room was quiet, its walls painted in soft blue tones designed to soothe nerves. But Diane Maxwell's nerves couldn't be soothed. Not today. Her baby slept peacefully beside her in a bassinet provided by the hospital, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm, unaware of the life-altering truths about to be spoken aloud. Across from her sat Rebecca Turner, now dressed in plain clothes but still carrying the weight of her badge, and Dr. Marina Gibson, a genetic specialist affiliated with the National Institutes of Health. Her face was calm, professional, but there was a weight in her eyes. Something big was coming. Diane sat straighter, bracing herself. She'd just survived a nightmare. Abandoned in the wilderness by her husband, hunted by a criminal ring, thrust into the heart of an FBI operation. She was exhausted, raw, stitched together both physically and emotionally. And now, just when she thought the worst was over, she was being told there was more. Something about her babies. Something extraordinary. Diane, Dr. Gibson began, unfolding several medical charts on the table between them. Before I explain the full scope, I want to make one thing very clear. Your children are healthy. They're developing beautifully. There's no cause for concern regarding their safety or health in a medical sense. Diane swallowed hard. But Dr. Gibson's eyes didn't waver. But they're not just ordinary triplets. The fertility clinic that implanted the embryos during your treatment conducted unauthorized genetic screenings as part of their internal data gathering operation. They were looking for specific markers, rare genetic mutations with potential medical applications. Diane stared at her, stunned. You're telling me they ran experiments on me? Not physical experiments, Gibson clarified, but your eggs were screened for traits. The embryos with the most potential, according to their criteria, were selected for implantation. You never consented to this, and that alone is a massive violation of ethics and federal law. Rebecca leaned in, her voice firm. What they did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. These people weren't interested in helping families. They were harvesting potential. And your children are very, very rare. Dr. Gibson turned the chart so Diane could see. Your triplets possess a genetic combination we've only seen a handful of times worldwide. It's a natural mutation, not engineered, but highly valuable. It offers innate immunity to several severe autoimmune conditions: lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, even certain immunodeficiencies. Their blood contains cellular patterns that could revolutionize treatments, even cures, for diseases that afflict millions. The air left Diane's lungs. So that's what they wanted? Not just insurance money. They wanted this. Rebecca nodded. Exactly. Project Legacy wasn't just about fraud. The insurance scheme was a front. The real money was in genetic data. Your babies were never meant to live as your children. If their plan had succeeded, you would have tragically died, and the babies would have miraculously survived in the hands of a foundation secretly run by the ring's investors. They would have erased their identities, their origin, their names. Diane couldn't speak. She looked at her babies, Faith, Jean, and Christopher, and the rage that filled her was unlike anything she had ever known. They had been viewed as property, as currency, as commodities. Dr. Gibson's tone softened. But none of that happened, because you fought, you survived, and now you have choices, real ones. Diane's voice finally returned, tight with emotion. So what happens now? Are they still in danger? Rebecca hesitated. Possibly. We've seized most of the operation's records, but some data was already sold. We're tracing the buyers. Many of them didn't realize the information was obtained illegally, at least not at first. But we can't guarantee that all of them will walk away quietly. Gibson picked up the thread. That's why the NIH is offering you protection. Through our special research partnership program, families like yours are given housing, security, and complete control over how, when, or if their children's genetic data is used in research. You'll never be forced into anything, but if you choose to participate, your family could help shape the future of medicine. Diane sat still, the weight of the moment pressing down like a mountain. Her children could help cure disease, but at what cost to their privacy, their safety, their humanity? I don't want them to grow up in hiding, she said quietly, but I won't let anyone turn them into lab specimens either. And they won't be, Gibson said gently. You'd be their advocate, their protector. You'd decide the pace, the boundaries. You'd be empowered, not exploited. Rebecca added, we'll place a full security detail. You'll be legally protected. Publicly, you'll be part of a government partnership, with press coverage even, which is often the best shield against covert threats. The more visible your story is, the harder it is for anyone to silence it. Diane thought of Richard, or Deus, as he truly was, locked in a federal prison, unaware that the very miracles he had tried to profit from had slipped through his fingers. He had seen them as dollar signs. She saw them for what they were, her children. Fighters, survivors. She looked at Jean, who stirred softly in her sleep, her tiny fingers curling around her blanket. Then at Faith, always the quiet observer, in Christopher, whose gentle nature reminded Diane of the life she wanted to give them, one of purpose, not fear. I want them to grow up knowing they're special, she said slowly, but not because of their DNA, because of what they've survived, because of who they are. Rebecca smiled. That's exactly why you're the right person to lead this. Dr. Gibson passed her a folder. Inside were details of the program, safe housing near one of the NIH's partner research campuses, pediatric specialists, therapists, a flexible education plan, and Diane's reinstatement path to finish her nursing degree. You'd be living openly, Gibson said, but safely and with purpose. As Diane signed her name at the bottom of the agreement, she felt something shift and weighed her, a quiet strength rising to the surface. Not the kind forged in anger, but in resolve. She had been a victim, a survivor. Now she was something else entirely, a protector, a mother. And whether the world saw her children as miracles or mutations didn't matter anymore. To her, they were simply everything. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the wide kitchen windows of Diane Maxwell's new home, a spacious, secured residence provided through the NIH's Special Research Partnership Program. Outside, the front lawn was blanketed in gold-tinged autumn leaves. Inside, the sound of soft baby babble filled the nursery monitor beside her coffee mug. Diane stood at the stove in a cozy sweater, watching the world quietly turn while pancakes sizzled on the griddle. It was a scene that would have felt impossible not long ago. A life that, for a terrifying stretch of time, she had feared would never be hers. The triplets, Faith, Jean, and Christopher, were now 6 months old and thriving. They had just hit every developmental milestone right on schedule, despite their dramatic start in life. Their immune profiles continued to puzzle and excite the medical community. But here at home, they were just babies, laughing, rolling over, reaching for toys. They had no idea their blood carried the secrets to curing some of the world's most devastating autoimmune diseases. And that was exactly how Diane wanted it. The doorbell rang. On the security screen, Diane smiled as she spotted Fabiana Scott, arms full of her famous chocolate chip muffins, a floral scarf wrapped around her neck. Since the rescue, Fabiana had moved to the area and taken a part-time role in the pediatric wing of the NIH's Partner Research Hospital. She had become the triplets' Gran, a role she slid into with grace and fierce protectiveness. "There are my beautiful miracles," Fabiana beamed as she stepped inside, immediately scooping up Jean from her baby bouncer. "And how is our warrior mama this morning?" Diane grinned, brushing flour off her hands. "Better. Sleep-deprived, but better. The nightmares are happening less often now." They both knew what she meant. Even with the security, even with the comfort of a new life, the memories of the forest, the betrayal, the tunnels, and the gunfire weren't so easily erased. Healing was slow, but it was real. As the babies napped, Fabiana sat across from Diane at the kitchen table. "Dr. Gibson said another family was identified in Sweden," she said. "Same genetic profile. They're flying in next month to join the program." Diane nodded. "She called this morning. I'm meeting with them during intake. It still blows my mind that what started as an act of survival turned into something this massive. Because of you," Fabiana said gently. "You changed the course of things, Diane, for yourself, for them, for all the families who'll come after." Before Diane could respond, there was a knock at the back door. She didn't even need to check the camera. It was Louis, now her most trusted partner in both security and life. He had taken a transfer to a regional law enforcement division nearby, and though he never made things complicated, it was clear he'd become a constant presence in the life of Diane and her children. As he stepped inside and kissed the top of Christopher's head, Fabiana gave Diane a knowing look. "He's been a good friend," Diane said, slightly flushed. Fabiana smiled knowingly. "Friends are important, especially the kind who would chase you through an abandoned mine with a baby in one arm and a gun in the other." They all laughed, but the truth behind the joke wasn't lost on any of them. Later that afternoon, Rebecca Turner arrived, dressed in casual jeans and a leather jacket, a far cry from the armored agent who had once tackled Richard Deus Thorne to the ground. Her work at the FBI's Medical Fraud Division had expanded, and she remained one of the few people who truly understood what Diane had been through. "There's something I wanted to bring you," Rebecca said as she handed Diane a folder. "It's from the last sweep of Richard's office. There's a trust account, funded anonymously by one of the companies that bought genetic data from the organization. Before they realize where it came from, they want to make amends." Diane frowned. "Is it clean?" "We checked it inside out," Rebecca said. "It's managed by an independent third party. No strings. The money is for the triplets' future. Education, healthcare, whatever they need." Diane's fingers tightened around the folder. She thought about all the lives these companies had endangered, all the women manipulated, all the children turned into experiments. But now, maybe something good could come from it. Maybe her babies could have a future filled with choice, not fear. "What about my education?" she asked suddenly. Fabiana's eyes sparkled. "I've already spoken to the hospital. You can finish your nursing degree right here, with a flexible schedule. And the research facility would love to have you on staff once you're ready. You'd be working with families just like yours." Diane felt something settle in her chest, something fierce and healing. She had always thought her life was over when Richard drove away that day. But here she was, 6 months later, holding her daughter and planning her return to medicine, this time on her terms. I want them to know, she said softly, nodding toward the triplets, that they are not their DNA, that they are not experiments, that they're kids, real kids, and that their mom fought for them to live freely. That, Rebecca said with quiet conviction, is why you're the one leading this story now. Not them. You. 5 years later, Diane stood behind a podium at the National Institutes of Health, speaking before a sea of researchers, policymakers, and parents. Behind her, a slide showed 3 smiling kindergartners, faces blurred for privacy but unmistakably vibrant. 5 years ago, Diane began, I was abandoned in the forest with 3 newborns in a stitched abdomen. I should have died there. My children should have disappeared into a system designed to harvest them. But we survived. And today I stand before you not just as a mother or a nurse, but as the voice of families who've had to fight to protect their children's humanity from those who see only numbers. In the audience, Louis, now her husband, sat next to Fabiana, who dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Rebecca stood near the back, proud, arms crossed. The Maxwell protocols, Diane continued, have not only led to medical breakthroughs in treating lupus, arthritis, and immune disorders, but have redefined how we approach consent, ethics, and human dignity in genetic research. These children are not commodities. They are the future. Later, as she walked through the rooftop garden above the research center, Diane looked down to the courtyard where Jean, Faith, and Christopher played beneath a fluttering tree. They were happy, healthy, whole, and Richard? He would spend the rest of his life in prison, never knowing that the lives he tried to erase had gone on to change the world. Diane turned toward the sunlight, knowing that the darkest part of her story had become the spark that lit the way for so many others. She didn't just survive. She rewrote the ending.